All right, let's get started then. So, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you. So, good morning to all of you that have been able to join us either today or via Zoom. Where's the camera? Hey. So, my name is Adam Tima, and I, along with my colleagues Nikki B. and Cheryl Mayoka, Cheryl's in the back there, I want to thank you to the Barbara Weiss Community Engagement Center. For the School of Comm Risk and Crisis Strategy Workshop. I want to thank the Community Engagement Center for allowing us to host this here. It's a lovely building. It works out just amazing for moments like this. I want to also thank the UNO Cultural Enrichment Grant, the School of Communication, the College of Communication, Fine Arts and Media, and the College of Public Affairs and Community Service for sponsoring the event, allowing it to be free for you all to attend today. So please thank them. By simply looking through our news sources, whatever they may be, there have been several recent high-profile risk and crisis events that have been occurring both locally and nationally. In fact, they're happening right now. And if you just close your eyes, think of what your news scroll looked like, there they are. Weather, food safety, corporate events, and our upcoming general election are just a few of the areas that we all want to be more prepared for, right? That's what we want to be. Part of that is a strong communication strategy, process, and day of procedure if ever an event were to occur. That is what inspired this event about a year ago to bring researchers, scholars, subject matter experts, and practitioners all together at UNO, for Omaha, and for the area communities to learn from. We wanted to bring everyone together in one spot to ask questions. That's what we want to do today. So, page 3. I want to cover today's schedule with you all really quick. You can also pull the event information up, including the agenda, if you scan any of the QR codes that we've got posted around to your phone. We're going to have 2 panels, as you all know. They'll be about an hour apiece with a 15-minute break in between. We have refreshments coming in kind of throughout the morning for you all here. If you get up and return late between a break, what have you, just sneak in. I teach a large lecture lab. I won't embarrass you too much. So, after the panels, we're going to break for lunch. You're welcome to have lunch on campus. There's several locations here you could eat or vanish for a while and get out of here, as they say. And then there'll be about 90 minutes. After that, at 12:45, we're going to have our first afternoon breakout sessions. These sessions were meant for you to come in with questions, with ideas, with maybe plans in process, things of that nature, to talk with some of our panelists in the afternoon and say, hey, does this make sense? Does this work? Or maybe you have no clue where to start. You're like, we want something, we've got nothing. Or ask questions. That's what we're here for. So the panels, the breakouts, I'll talk about it again after the break. The education and health breakouts are going to meet in this room at the far ends. And then the public relations and governmental breakouts will meet across the atrium over in 230 and 231. At 2 o'clock, after the first breakout, we will take a break. 2:15, head back to your groups, or go to a different group, or head on out. Enjoy 87 degrees in October, which I'm not understanding at all in Nebraska, but there it is. So, with that said, I want to get to the first panel. Today, the first panel is going to explore the current research, findings, understandings, and work being done in the field of risk and crisis comm from a variety of perspectives. On the panel today, we have, going from my left to right, Dr. Deanna Selnow. She's the chair of the Department of Communication at Clemson University. Dr. Tim Selnow is on faculty at Clemson University School of Department of Communication. We have Michelle Black. Michelle Black is a member of the Department of Political Science here at University of Nebraska, Omaha. Next to Michelle, we have Norman Wong. Norman Wong is in the Department of Communication, University of Oklahoma. And next to Norman, we have Sherry Vale. She's the Dean of the School of College of Journalism and Mass Communication at UNL. We bring them all here to give us their expertise, so please thank them for all being here, first of all. So how we're going to do this is like this. I got a set of questions and prompts. I've already sent it to the panel. They have taken a look at them. We'll see how that goes. If you have questions you want to ask, head over to Cheryl. She's back there. Wave hand, please. She is monitoring both the online chat via the Zoom feed as well as here. If you have questions, go speak with her and write them down on a card. She's going to either run them up to me or at some point during she'll get them to me, and we'll read those aloud. That way they're into the mic. And so folks can hear them on Zoom as well as in here. That way we can all hear you in the room as well. So, but if you have questions, please pass them over to her and we'll get started. So first question is, I'm going to kind of go down the line here. If you want to introduce yourselves and where you see your areas of expertise. Deanna?
Okay, thanks, Adam. I'm Deanna Selnow, chair and professor at Clemson University. My area related to risk and crisis is instructional, health, risk, and crisis. So I'm very interested in really figuring out how to communicate most effectively to the general publics that we're trying to reach in a way that is intelligible so that they understand what's going on and that they enact the actions that are going to be the most helpful for self-protection for them and those they care about.
Awesome, thank you. Tim?
I'm Tim Selnow, and I'm also at Clemson University. My specialization is, of course, risk and crisis communication, working in many cases with government agencies in the United States and in some other countries, working on large issues of risk and crisis communication, often at a global level.
Awesome. Michelle?
Michelle Black from UNO, Associate Professor of Political Science. I work with EnSite as well as the Nebraska Deterrence Lab. I have over 17 years of national security expertise. I was former Army, where I was psychological operations. I've been deployed to Iraq and worked in crisis communication, as well as, and put it plainly, influencing populations to prevent war and conflict. Right now, I've also worked as the Department of the Air Force in strategic deterrence. We're trying to prevent leaders from conducting war. I don't know if I'm very successful in that, but I tried. And then, of course, now an associate professor where I work with EnSite, counterterrorism and insurgency, as well as the Deterrence Lab, which we work specifically on deterring threats and crisis and performing experiments and working with our students.
Awesome, thank you. Norman?
Hi, my name is Norman Wong. I am an associate professor in the Department of Communication at the University of Oklahoma. My area primarily is in health communication. I study health communication primarily from a mass media perspective, so a lot of my research looks at, with regards to kind of risk, is how do we design effective risk messages for various types of health threats. So a lot of my work, I've looked at a variety of areas, including things like tobacco. I've looked at vaccinations. Obviously with COVID, that's really the big one right now. So a lot of my research focuses on, again, kind of looking at how do we communicate more effectively with the public as far as you know, how to get them to mitigate risk. And also a lot of my work also is involved with a lot of campaigns. So I work with a lot of nonprofit organizations and groups as far as helping them with messaging and those kind of things as well.
Thank you. Sherry?
Good morning, I'm Sherry Vale. I'm professor and dean of the College of Journalism and Mass Communications at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln down the road. My particular area is more focused on crisis communication from a public relations perspective. So how do you engage with your audience when you've already lost their trust? How do you regain trust following an event, oftentimes because you communicated in a way that you should not have, that didn't meet the values of your audience and the expectation of your audience. So that's my particular area.
Which never happens. Never, right. Second question. Michelle, I'm going to start with you on this one. How would you define a risk or crisis?
My notes, I hope that was okay.
Notes are great. I love them.
And mainly because I'm actually working on a paper with my co-author right now, and we're trying to define risk. So far, we're looking at risk can be defined as the intersection of threat and vulnerability, thereby creating an occurrence that negatively impacts the targeted goals, the actor's targeted goals or equities, and understanding the likelihood of that risk becoming a realization. So crisis is that negative event with more than just one single point of failure, but multiple second and third order effects. And so that's how I would define it right now.
Awesome. Very measurable, by the way. There's a whole lot going on there. That's fantastic. Tim, do you want to go for there?
Sure. Risk is fraught with uncertainty, and I always make sure people understand that are working with me that risk and chance are two different things. Chance can be stimulating, something really good could happen or something really bad could happen. With risk, we know that there is a hazard, something we're very concerned about. Our uncertainty resides in the potential that we will or will not experience a crisis based on that risk, and to what degree.
Excellent. Any other thoughts from the panel? Sherry?
So in my area, we look at crisis as an expectation gap. It is what your stakeholders expect you to do, how they expect you to communicate, and how you actually respond and communicate. And that gap is where that crisis lives.
Okay.
I would like to say a distinguishing characteristic between risk and crisis is that a risk is a potential threat, and a crisis is an imminent threat. And so when you're working with your general publics, an imminent threat, people realize the need to do something, so you've got their attention. But a potential threat, which is a risk, we don't have that luxury of people realizing that it's important for them to pay attention and do.
Cool. And Norman, thoughts?
Yeah, well, I was basically going to just jump off what Deanna was talking about. Risk, the way that I usually define it is it's the probability of an event happening, right? So as opposed to crisis, I would view that as actually the manifestation of that risk. So basically the idea that it's actually happening or it will be imminently happening soon.
Okay, so we've got kind of a conversation of definition going on here. And I'm already off script here. So what I'm wondering about is if you're working with a population, with a community, with a client, whatever the case may be, how do you differentiate for the non-academic what those two spaces are? Because for us, I can hear, like, I hear Michelle's definition, I'm like, I can do that. Yep, cool, 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 excellent, right? So it works for the work we do. How do you translate that to someone who is not from our space? And someone take a stab.
I'm going to start because that's really what we've been working on a lot in the last several years, and that is you have to start with the receivers you're trying to reach, and you have to listen, and you have to understand their perspective, and then you can take them from where they're at to make it make sense. What we typically do is, as scientists, we want to give all the precise details, and our audiences don't need that. What do they need for self-protection for themselves and those they care about? And the only way to know that is to start to hear where they're coming from. And you can hear my educational background in that because that's what we do with students when we're effective. We've got to find out what they understand at the beginning before we can take them to where they need to go. And that would be what I would say with translating risk and crisis to the general publics.
Awesome. Other thoughts from what
Well,
Deanna said?
If this were easy, we wouldn't have a problem. But the problem is proving the negative. We can be so effective at identifying and relieving risk that people don't continue to recognize the danger. And I always try to communicate that a crisis is a risk manifested, and it's something we really don't want to have happen. It's got tremendous hazard. Try to take it apart, point out what it could do to your children, what it could do to the other people that you love, what it could do to your community, how long it could take to recover, and then talk about the affordability, the workability. The self-efficacy is a term we use, but you can do this to alleviate that. Take one more thing to worry about out of your life.
Awesome. Other thoughts on this translation to non-academics? All right, then from there, I'm going to go to the next question. And Tim, I want to start with you on this one. What do you think makes an effective communication strategy? We've seen them go wrong. Sherry, your whole area of research is when they go wrong, right? So what makes an effective communication strategy within this space? Tim, you go start.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. I worked a lot with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, and the mantra that Barbara Reynolds, one of their communication directors, came up with, and I was actually at a conference with her when she manifested this, and that is that the right words at the right time save lives. So you've got those variables, the right words and timing, but also one has to be careful to make sure that we're getting the right words at the right time to the right people. I'm very concerned about talking over the top of people or about not reaching those who are at particular risk, including those who have fewer resources that are socially or economically disadvantaged. So an effective message to me is, of course, at the right time to the right people, but also that we're very considerate of how that message is distributed and how it is translated.
Excellent. Other thoughts on this question?
Yes, I'd like to add to that because my panelists mentioned receiver and to the right people. So I believe an effective communication strategy is understanding your target audience. In my past, we would always do target audience analysis. We have to understand who we're communicating to. So that's the first step. Who needs to hear this information? What do they think? How do they receive information? And how do they process that information? Second, what is it you want them to do? It's very simple. So the who and the what. If you want them to do something, it needs to be very simple and clear that all your target audience will understand what to do. So back in the past, for the US Army, what we would do is we would conduct that target audience analysis. But a lot of our work, we had to make sure that people were getting the message, and this time it was the Iraqi public, on what events were happening, how to prevent future conflict, how to prevent people from getting from preventing them from attacks that were happening. So we had to understand how they communicated, get their message out, and then tell them what we needed them to do. And lastly, I'll end with this, is that it has to deal with credibility. If who you want to speak to doesn't believe your message, then it's gonna stop there. And credibility isn't gained by one simple message. It takes sometimes days, weeks, years to gain that credibility. So that's what I believe are the kind of the steps for success: the who, the what, and the credibility.
Thank you. Other thoughts on this? Sherry?
I'll jump
Sherry,
in
then
on
Norman.
the credibility side of it, because that's where my research lives. It is planning ahead of time, having your plan ready to go. The crisis happens, you're able to enact your plan. That's the best case scenario. The challenge is you enact your plan, you miss something, or it becomes politicized, or there's other factors that come in, the communication gets muddy, you could be discredited for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with your response. And once that credibility is hurt, it takes much more to be able to build it back up. So making sure that you're understanding that you can have your great plan in place, you can do everything that was planned out, but you have to be ready for those additional variables that you have no control of coming into it. And it has to do with creating that rhetorical space where that message lives. That becomes so challenging.
Awesome. Norman, you have a thought?
So I've got a couple of thoughts here as far as the idea of communicating effectively. I think in terms of if you're communicating risk, one of the main things is, as kind of mentioned by several of the other panelists, the idea of having actionable steps for people to take. I think one of the things that people, when they think about risk, or when they think about dealing with potential risk, it's the idea of what's the plan of action. Giving people specific steps, specific instructions on what to do for them to help mitigate whatever the risk might be, I think that's critical. Being able to communicate that in a plain manner. So a lot of it also has to do with, I think, from a communication standpoint, avoiding, jargon, using sort of so again, understanding the audiences in terms of their language and literacy, particularly literacy, because I think that's one of the big things, one of the big barriers as far as communicating risk is we have to be able to communicate it in a way that they should be able to grasp and understand, okay, how much do I have to worry? What exactly do I need to do? How am I going to be impacted? And then as far as the idea from a crisis standpoint, I think one of the main things that I would just kind of add on as far as communicating to the public, providing them with timely, updated information is really important as far as a crisis is concerned. Making sure also that whoever you have speaking on behalf of your group, speaking with compassion is also going to be really important as well. Because I think, especially if you're dealing with the crisis situations, people, depending on the type of crisis you're dealing with, people have, lost homes, people have lost lives. And so that's, one way is kind of going back to what Sherry was talking about in terms of establishing that credibility. It's sort of the idea that, look, we're here, we're here to support you in terms of your time during this crisis, and not just, sort of providing just plain information. It's the idea that we genuinely care about what's going on, and we're trying to do our best as far as providing, again, information that's going to be helpful.
Can I give an example that
Please,
kind
absolutely.
of pulls this together?
Yep.
We did a lot of work, as Tim already mentioned, with the CDC. And one of the things that we discovered in some of the research is that what you're talking about there, we have to be able to translate. And so one of the things is we looked at the translation for the Spanish-speaking populations, right, in Central Florida. And it wasn't just about translation to Spanish. It was also about two other things. One is direct translation doesn't always work. And so then that doesn't make sense. And then the other thing is that many of the Hispanic populations that we were looking at in Central Florida, Spanish isn't their first language either. They're speaking indigenous languages from Mexico, so they still weren't being able to get it. And the final thing is efficacy. Even though there were very specific actions to wear a mask and social distance and they had essential worker jobs. They had to be close to other people. They lived in multi-family homes, so they couldn't deal with that. And they couldn't get access to masks, right? So all of those specific actionable instructions, even if they were translated into a language that they could understand, they couldn't have efficacy to even enact them.
I'm starting to hear these themes show up, and one of the ways I like to do things like this is the themes start showing up, and this idea of actionable step, the idea of credibility, but also the idea of empathy. And I think of empathy through just demonstrating that, we're here with you, that we are not just going to deliver and get out. But I feel like empathy also is expressed through understanding linguistic difference, understanding cultural difference. If you don't take that into account as you're working with whatever populations you're working with, the message is going to stop before it even can start working for them. I have our first question from the audience. This starts with Norman and then everyone else. With public health messages and others, how do you combat misinformation, disinformation, including nefarious characters purposefully trying to create disharmony? You read my mind, man. Let's start there.
Okay, so that's a really good question. Obviously, that's one of the big problems, especially within the sort of public health realm, is the idea that there's so much information out there from so many different sources. So how do you combat misinformation? I think the best way to combat misinformation is to acknowledge the fact that there's going to be, that there are going to be people out there who are trying to convince you to not do certain things. So providing people with just acknowledging the fact that there's going to be there's going to be attempts at trying to misinform you. I think that's kind of a good starting point as far as just, because I think from there, then you can start providing people with, or educating people with things that are going to be able to counter those messages. So, and one of the things that I've been working with a lot of my research, so one of the theories that I work with that deals specifically with that is inoculation theory,
Yep.
which basically is the idea of, similar to how, you get inoculated against the flu, it's the idea of we use information to try to inoculate people against misinformation. So we provide people basically snippets of, these are the kind of messages that you're gonna see from people trying to misinform you, and here are, the reasons why they're incorrect. So we would provide them with a lot of the, with a lot of evidence and credible evidence to kind of cite, in terms of like, okay, they cited this study to kind of back their claim. Here's why that doesn't really work, or here's why that kind of falters. And we kind of work our way through that as far as trying to, again, sort of debunk a lot of the things that happen.
So Sherry was ready to jump in, then Michelle. So Sherry, let's start with you.
So I think one of the challenges too, when we're communicating in response to an event that's happening in real time, is that we're trying to respond, right? We're trying to get that message out there, and we see the misinformation out there, and we're trying to respond to that while we're still trying to get our message out. The key is being consistent with your message and not letting yourself get lost in the weeds in some of this, chasing down the responses. When I do, we'll have to talk later, Michelle. I do training, media training for some folks at Stratcom. What is your mission? We are here to serve and protect the American public. Leading with your mission, whatever government organization you're working for, making sure that you are always leading with that mission so that you can be consistent in your communication rather than chasing down the latest headline.
Awesome. Thank you. Michelle.
Yeah, I think this is a very important question because, especially as communicators, we deal with the counter message. So how do you address the counter message? One of the first things that I was taught and that we practice is don't repeat the counter message. Do not, make sure you do not repeat or communicate their message, because if you do, you've just communicated their message to people who've never heard it. So that is the key. The other one is I wholeheartedly agree with my two panelists. It's the evidence. Show them the evidence. Show them and keep consistent on your message. Because when you do that, and that could be many ways. It could be narratives. It could be actually physically showing them that consistency, that message. Because then you're on message and you continue that message. That narrative will overshadow the counter propaganda or the counter messaging.
Can I throw echo chambers into the mix?
Bring it, please.
One of the things with the whole consistency thing is that we live in this infodemic of echo chambers, right? And so people are getting a consistent message, but it's the wrong message. It's misinformation that keeps getting said over and over again in different echo chambers. And so we have to break through that. And one of the things that we talk a lot about is during the times of quiet times is we need to make sure that we get the disparate people around the table, because we need the message to be going out from the influencers that people are listening to, not just from us or our expertise, because people don't necessarily buy our argument because they don't trust us. So we need to get the people around the table from these disparate publics that are deemed as credible to be on board with us, so that when the messages are going out, those influencers are helping us get it out to those different publics.
Go for it, Tim.
Yeah, and I can't pass on this. I would answer it in one word, and that is compassion. If we want to stay on point, we need to emphasize compassion. And I don't want to take credit for this because we were in Geneva last spring at the World Health Organization at a small group of people from multi-nations talking about disinformation. And the conclusion that this group came to is that the first and foremost, we need to stay on point, like virtually all the panelists have said, but that point is that we are here to help, we are coming with compassion, we always come with compassion, we're not here to promote division, we're here to promote well-being, and that well-being is my compassion for you, how can I help, and here's what will be of service to you.
So as I'm, again, kind of listening along here, I'm noticing this idea of being preemptive, like getting out there before the fact, getting out there, make sure your message is out there. The idea of going to Norman, the idea of inoculation, right? Make sure not only are you preemptive, but you're doing it in a certain way, you're making sure, and then going along with what Tim and what Jerry are talking about, when you are preemptive in that messaging, ensure that it is directed towards the populations, plural, that you are trying to work with, as opposed to a single, abstract, this is my audience. I mean, particularly those that are in nonprofits here, particularly that those work with very specific populations, you know them. Like, you know them better than anyone else in this room, so how do they hear? What is the language code that you all use together? Like, how do you communicate together? That is, I think, as I'm hearing this all kind of go through, I'm starting to hear this kind of show up. This leads into something that we've been seeing in the news right now. It goes along with what the question was. So we have the events going on in the Southeast right now. We have hurricane after hurricane. We have and everything going on, particularly in North Carolina right now. I have family there, so I'm hearing about things going on in that space. We know that there have been mis and disinformation. I don't want to call them campaigns because that assumes coordination. Now that could exist, but it also just seems like people just wanting 5 seconds. You know, their moment, right? Their viral moment. In a space where we're no longer dealing with just coordinated counter campaigns, but also viral moments, how do you apply or approach that notion with what you all are talking about? I'll just throw that to the floor. Like, where do you start? I'm watching the gears run as we go here.
We're living this every day because we're in South Carolina, and we have students and colleagues in North Carolina. And I would say two things, Adam. First, I would say that much of the conversation is not intended for the people suffering particularly in North Carolina right now. It is intended for the outstate voters that are going to be involved in an election coming up in November. Secondly, I would say that there are bipartisan, well-spoken individuals representing the hardship that individuals are facing. And those are the key stories. That is taking control of the narrative to preempt some of this process. People can talk politics and will talk politics and perhaps even must talk politics. But as long as we're doing what we can to promote the story of who's in need and what they need and what we can do as people who are in a better position right now to share resources, I think we're taking back the narrative.
Excellent. Sherry, please, and then Michelle.
I think part of it too is looking at how individuals come to believe certain messages. So when we're having these conversations out there, trying to get a message across, there can be your personal bias that comes in where you automatically think that person's an idiot because they believe whatever that misinformation is out there, and how you treat that individual. I love Tim's word of compassion, treating them with compassion and asking why they feel that way, how they came to believe those messages, and where are they getting those messages, so that you can do what we talked about before, make sure that you are out there and working in those communities so that when the crisis does hit, you're able to come through with that message.
Awesome. Michelle.
This isn't completely formed correctly, so forgive me. Really, I think it goes back to that credibility part. We're in this space and there's a lot of noise. And so what you would want to do is show the credibility of the experts versus the ones who are making noise, who actually knows what's going on, who has that expertise to send that message. I think we've experienced that quite a bit over our years, and you know, from learning about the pandemic and learning now about weather-related things. There's a lot of things going on. There's also a lot of noise. So distinguishing the noise from the expertise.
And one thing that happened really well between Helene and what happened in the Carolinas and then Milton that happened in Florida is that the message that started going out was listen to your local experts, listen to your local folks. And that was a positive thing I want to point out that happened between Helene and Milton. So sometimes the communicators, they get it really right. That was really good strategy.
So one thing I heard in that was the idea of expertise. But I'm thinking about expertise of in-group versus out-group. You know, like the in-group, who are the people on the ground? Who are the people in the spaces? Who are the folks in the nonprofits in the spaces versus, again, Tim, to your point, the exterior voices that are basically looking for a way to influence as opposed to solve, right? So I wonder if that's something that we can take away from that conversation. I want to start with Sherry on this one here, and then everyone jump in. It's a three-part question, y'all, so just stay tuned. What do you think the most important things to think about are before, during, and after an event?
So before, it's knowing how your audience or your stakeholders, how they're communicating now. Where do they get their information? and setting those expectations before the event of how you're going to communicate, what they can expect from you. During is actually doing what you said you were going to do, right? Meet those expectations. And then after, I think, goes back to reiterating what you have done, that you did what you said you were going to do, and that you're looking for opportunities to make it better.
Can I go on that part really quick there? This idea of the postmortem report. That idea of here's what we said we're going to do, here's what we did, here's what worked and didn't work. Like, that's something that we talked about in the risk class I taught last spring. It's like, you've got to be able to say, here's what did not work and how do we shift that. So, cool. So, other thoughts on the before, during, and after question?
I'll be really short and sweet. Before is when you can build trust. And so before is when you're going to be working with people, listening to people, side by side with people, so that you are building trust with whoever it is you're trying to reach. That's absolutely critical before. During is making sure you're getting those action steps out there in a way that's efficacious, so that you're mitigating harms and saving lives. And after, communicate compassion in recovery and organizational learning. What are we learning? What are we doing differently? How are we going to make it better next time?
How about the rest of y'all on this question, before, during, after?
I think there's been a lot of good information shared. If I might, I would just add one element to after. And after, I think it's very important to communicate how we are better now than we were before this crisis happened. Yes, we've had damage. Yes, we have problems. But how has this knowledge informed us? What have we learned, and what will we do so that we can help you be safer the next time that we face something? Even to the point where we may not have to face a crisis like this one again.
Excellent. Sherry?
I think one of the aspects to following the crisis, we have this feeling of, oh, shoo, we got through it. I don't want to talk about it anymore, right? When we're looking at the organizational response to it. The thing is, if you don't communicate those lessons learned, if they aren't covered in the media, when that next event happens, and they're pulling up what happened last time, there's no demonstration that you have changed expectations, that you are going to do things differently. So making sure that you communicate what you learned and what you are going to change for the next time around.
I like that. Absolutely. Michelle?
I would just like to add, because I agree with everything that's been said, is that before, during, and after, what would be helpful is if you prevent knee-jerk reactions, is what I call them. Something that may have you deviate from your message. Try to prevent that, because you want to stay on message. You want to continue to build the credibility, but sometimes something happens and that can distract us. And so I would say try to prevent the knee-jerk reactions.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other thoughts on Norman? Or
I think all other panels, I think, for the most part, covered the main points there. The only thing I would just kind of add to that is, as far as during, I think, in addition to what Deanna talked about, as far as like providing resources and those kind of things, I think is also the idea just reminding people, again, kind of going back to what Tim was talking about, the idea of compassion even during the event. So the idea of offering them whatever support that they need, as far as just the idea of, whether it be resources and in terms providing them with actionable steps, but also the idea of just providing more emotional support when people are dealing with a crisis event.
excellent. Any other thoughts from the panel? All right. So next question I want to go to, and this is going to, I've added a section to this. I was thinking about it as we all were talking. Well, it's an easy one. So part one is this. Where's the research in the field right now? Like what is being looked at, and not just from you all, but what are you seeing happen in the field right now? And the part two I want to add to that, because there are a lot of folks in here who are not academics. How do non-academics do this? How do non-academics do a post-crisis event, analysis? How do what can they do? We can go in and we got all the toys and the tricks and the tools, but how does someone who doesn't have that access do it? So first, where's the research at right now? And then second, how do folks who are not us do that work? And I'll just throw it, whoever wants to go on there to start.
You go first. Okay, where we're at and where we're heading is we really realize that we can't just think locally. We have to think locally and globally because we are a globalized world and society. And so we have to be thinking we're doing things comparatively across countries. We're doing within cultural groups within countries because it's no longer just a local issue, it's a global issue. And I would say that that is where we're at and heading, and that's okay. And then the other question was, how do non-academics
Yeah.
grapple with this? And I am going to put a plug out here because one thing that Tim and I just did is we tried to write a book for non-academics for this very reason, and it's called Before Crisis: The Practice of Effective Risk Communication, and it's available on Amazon. But also, if you are interested in that, come and see us afterwards, and we'll get a card or give you our cards. So you can reach out to us via email, and we'll send you a book. Okay, because the whole point was to reach the practicing professionals in a way that doesn't put all the jargon and the theoretical stuff in there in a way that is just not going to be practical and useful for y'all. So we actually just did that. So
Michelle.
So I believe where it is and where it is going, especially within the field that I'm researching, international security. International security is that there are many aspects to it, specifically technology we're dealing with. So I have a couple questions that I'm going to ask all of you, just because these are the questions that we're dealing with. One of them was already asked: how do we counter the false narratives? How do we delete misinformation posts? How do we stay ahead of communication online that is not always done by human? And why are we fighting against bots from overseas? And if you have an answer for those, you're my best friend. But it's really countering this technology that are not necessarily from a human space.
I'm writing things down because we're going to go somewhere with that. So, Tim.
Much of the research right now that's being done academically is using the word resilience, and it's a buzzword. There's all kinds of work being done in resilience, and if I could wave a wand and make something happen, it would be to make the word resilience disappear. And here's why. Resilience means we'll just get ready for the next one. Yeah, a lot of us spent time in North Dakota, several of our panelists. In Fargo, for example, people just the cities kept building the dikes higher. Well, yeah, more water, well, higher dike, until they were overwhelmed. And then there were big problems. That's what I think of as resilience, and truly, that's what resilience means. What I think that scholars are talking about is readiness. And readiness means that we're ready. We're ready for what happens. We've learned, we've changed. We aren't just going to be stronger next time. We're going to be smarter next time. So that is a lesson we need to learn as academics from people who are practicing risk and crisis communication in the trenches every day. You're trying to get ready, and we're preaching about resilience, and I think that's a good distinction worth mentioning on this panel.
Thank you. Other thoughts on this question?
I think one area that pulls into the reputation side right now and where we're seeing more and more research coming out is where it's well beyond the misinformation out there and more to what are we using AI for? And how is AI being used to create an image that looks very real? I mean, to the point that you can see the glint in the eyes of the people who have been created with AI. And now if you use the voice generator, I could sit here and record Norman for about 5 minutes and then have him say whatever I want him to say. So now when you have someone's actual voice, their actual likeness being put out and shared, that changes how we're going to be able to trust those messages. So how do we identify it? How do we get smarter than the machines who are learning to be smarter than us?
Which gets me to the thing I wrote down, AI and bots. And and granted, this is probably not an issue that's going to show up at a hyperlocal level, but it could. But we're definitely seeing it play out, obviously politically, but also socially. The idea of AI and bots being utilized as a way for misinformation campaigns, but they're also being utilized for information campaigns. I mean, they're not, AI are not the boogeymen, because they're not a man or a woman, they're a bunch of code, right? But they get utilized in so many different ways. So that might be our next direction to go with this conversation. Are any of you looking at that space? It sounds like, Michelle, you are. Like, definitely. So maybe we'll start with you. Like, what is there that you are trying to work through and make sense of?
Well, I think what we're doing specifically here at UNO is we are trying to first understand, as I mentioned, the target audience, who we're trying to, get the message to, how they make decisions and break that down. And then how that information is translated, how it's communicated. But we go a step further where in the lab, we look at multiple actors. So I think here we've talked a little bit about the communicator to the receiver. What we do at the lab is we're looking at, well, there are lots of receivers and there are a lot of communicators. So how do we break down that network and understand which messages are being translated to who? Can you send a message that's going to hit multiple audiences? And what would that message look like? So we're looking at multi-actor, and how do you communicate the conflicting messages that might be going on, or the similar actions? So that's currently what we're researching.
Other thoughts on this question? Sherry?
When I'm doing media training right now, whether it's with sailors or it's with folks in public health, we talk a lot about correcting misinformation in real time. So in the interview, if something comes forward, misinformation that's provided, make sure that you correct that in the interview, that it isn't accurate, but being careful how you do it. So when we were talking about noise out there, just shrugging it off as, oh, well, that's just noise, or that's not true. And how you do it can make those who believe it feel like idiots. And that, again, goes back to why do they believe that? Where are they coming from? And making sure that you are correcting that information, but you are correcting that information from a position of expertise. And again, going back to what is the mission, being consistent in what you're trying to provide.
So what I'm hearing here is that the easy move for the practitioner or the communicator is like, whatever, blow it off. It's the hard work to actually do the counter messaging and to use these moments of empathy and compassion to understand where they're coming from, and then do the hard work and get the message, start reshaping it. I've got a couple questions that popped here, and then we're gonna be wrapping up soon here. So first question is this: what are 3 tips you can give to a new spokesperson, new communicator, new practitioner who is about to, ready to go in front of the cameras during a crisis? So this is like go to your training moment, Sherry. So we're gonna start with you on this one. 3 tips.
Oh, 3. You have 0% control over what gets published or broadcast. You have 100% control over what comes out of your mouth. So make sure that you are prepared ahead of time. Don't try to riff off in the middle of the interview. And if you find that you are going down into a ditch, stop the car, correct the message, and get back on track. So we can go through, we start talking, and we're going on and on and on, and then you realize that you misspoke. Stop and say, hold up, I realized I misspoke, and provide the correct message. And that is incredibly important because 1, you don't want the wrong information out there, but 2, they don't want to be wrong either. So make sure that you stop and correct the message if you do start to go off track.
Excellent. Deanna?
I would add transparency to that. In other words, let them know what you know right now, what you don't know yet, and what you're doing to find out, and when you'll come back to them with more updates. If you do that as the spokesperson, people are going to know that you're coming back to them. If you aren't transparent about what you don't know right now, when you have to come back to them later and say something else, they're not going to believe you because it's going to sound like you changed your mind. So if you say what you know, what you don't know, what you're working on to find out, and when you'll come back to them with more.
Other thoughts on the 3 tips you would give someone who's in front of the camera right now?
This is, well, Deanna talked about the book that we wrote that we'll give you a copy if you want to take a look, but it's also, don't have them, but we had bookmarks. We're trying to hand this out. This is how strongly I believe this. If you can take a deep breath and remember that if you're about to go on camera or if you're about to be interviewed, people need to know 3 things. They need to know who's at risk, internalization. Who should be worried about this? What's happening and why? Explanation. Just explain it. Don't get carried away, just enough so they understand the threat. And third, action. What do you want them to do? Take a deep breath. Just remember, I have 3 things to say. Who's most vulnerable? Why are they most vulnerable? What am I asking them to do? Because I care about them and I want them to stay safe.
All right. Question part 2. What are the best 3 things, down to another 3 thing, you can do when providing media training to a spokesperson? Part 1, with all the time in the world. Part 2, with limited prep time. So you've got someone taking a prep class. What are the things you're going to teach them? You've got someone who's never been in front of the camera or who's never responded to an interview or is never responded online to something, and they've got like 5 minutes to get their head around it before it explodes. What do you do? What do you train them to do?
So when we have the time, we do full-scale exercise. So we'll have them respond to an incident, a question, an issue that's out there. We do it in standing in front of a green screen and you're being interviewed by remote from the control room, so you can't see the person who's interviewing, so you have to be able to listen to the question, you have to be able to respond to that, and then we'll move them over, we'll put them in a conversation set. So, oh, we're just having a conversation, which it is never just a conversation, it is an interview. So making sure that they have that experience. So we'll put them in different settings. We'll do a walk and talk interview where you have the camera rolling, and we'll even be a little dirty about it and say, oh, there's something wrong with the camera, and then ask them questions that they absolutely should not be answering on camera, and catch them on the hot mic so that we can demonstrate those challenges that they could face. And then the key is we make them watch it. So we record all of it, we watch it, we go through it, we talk about what went well, what didn't go well. They're there usually with a group of their peers. Usually we're doing it in a team setting so that they can get feedback and go through that experience. They have to have that experience and see what it's like. So that's what we do when we have all day.
When you don't have all day.
What's your message? I think everything Tim just said there, right? Who's your audience? What's the message that needs to go out there? How are you protecting them and going back to your mission? Why are you there? It's not just to have a conversation, it is to protect people in the middle of this crisis. So keeping that in the back of your mind at all times, that you are trying to help and why you're there.
All right. Tim, you look like you got something.
Yeah, quick story. We were wound up at Atlanta at CDC when flu vaccine, now this is several years ago, had put several children in the hospital. It was and these were children at risk, and this can happen because people have conditions, and when they get a vaccine, the most important people to get vaccines sometimes can have reactions. And this was not a CDC problem. They did not make the vaccine, but there was tremendous demand for an official from CDC to go on camera. We happened to be there, and we were in the room with the person that was about to talk in the media room, and she made the mistake of saying, "Do you have any advice for me?" And my colleague and I said, "Well, first thing you say, please say, our hearts go out to these families. This isn't CDC's issue. You can clarify from there and talk about who's at risk. But please, it's such a big issue. Please start with that." She said, "I'm not saying that. It's not our fault." I said, just please say that. And she did. And my colleague turned to me as we were walking out of the CDC to go home and watch the newscast on television because it was right at the news hour. And the networks were there. And he said, well, let's go watch TV to see if we still have jobs. But it's true. People want to know you care. I know I've said that 6 times today, but that's just something for the right before that I thought I'd add. I think there's been great information.
And to your credit and your colleagues' credit, that has become sort of a standard, almost a standard operating procedure for spokespersons, right? And when they don't say that, it's kind of problematic, right? It's like, yeah. So that's good. See? Good job.
All right, we are just about at time. Any final thoughts from the panel?
Every leader now in our current environment is a crisis communicator. So it is.
You got applause.
Whether you are a government agency, you are a nonprofit, you are in education, if you are a leader, you are communicating in and around crisis. And it's making sure that you are prepared to manage that.
Michelle, I got a thought.
So we've talked a lot about narratives and communication. Communication can be done through actions as well. And so don't forget that. It's not just what you're saying, it's what you're doing. And so making sure you're connecting that to your message, because that can be very powerful.
Awesome.
Well, I'm going to say one other thing too.
Bring it.
Sorry. I want to thank Adam for putting this together because I believe that practitioners and researchers need to have conversations together because we need each other to help save the world. That's what I believe. And so I just want to say that we host a conference March 10th through 12th every year, the International Crisis and Risk Communication Conference. This year it'll be at Clemson University, March 10th through 12th. And that's exactly what we do. We have about 25 different countries represented, and we have researchers and practicing professionals, together about 200 people in the same room for 2 days where we grapple with these issues. So come and join us.
Cool. With that said, please thank them for giving some time to us today.